Hello, everybody, and welcome to Answers for May 5th, 2020. I'm Kevin Daly, your host. Today on Answers, there will be an update on the school situation. There will be an update on the homeschool situation with Audra Talbot. My special guest this week is Walt Glomb, the Executive Director of the Connecticut Council on Developmental Disabilities. And of course, there will be time for questions and answers with participants. So get ready to mash that Q&A button. We want to hear from you, and don't wait till the end. If a question arises, send it to us now. We want to hear from you. Answers is brought to you by PATH, Parent to Parent Family Voices of Connecticut. The nonprofit PATH has served families of children with disabilities for over 30 years. Everything PATH offers, all its programs and services, are offered at no cost to the families we serve. In front of you, you see a partial list of the services that PATH provides, and it's not just about special education either. Too many for me to go into detail on, but I did want to put the spotlight on one: charting the life course. Charting the life course is a framework that you can use to plan your child's future. It's based on the principle that all people have the right to a good life, where they have life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, just like our forefathers wanted us to have. It's person-centered, created by families, to be used by families, and it's used nationwide in public schools and other institutions. The great thing about Life Course is that you can do it on your own without relying on anyone else. If you need to plan your child's future, PATH can help. PATH can provide you with all the information you need to get started. So for more information about Life Course, please contact Sherry Romblett at PATH. Her email address is there right in front of you. If you have any questions about PATH, you can always go to the PATH website, which is in front of you. And to catch up on PATH, you can see us on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. If you have any questions about this webinar, or if you have any questions about its content, please contact me, Kevin Daly, at this email address. And here comes the fine print, folks. This webinar is not to be taken as legal advice, as healthcare advice, or any kind of advice. It's a webinar about answers and trying to find answers to questions that many people have. And this webinar and any attached materials are the sole property of PATH and are not to be used for any other purpose without the express written permission of PATH. Here's the school update for May 5th, 2020. And there's breaking news, as many of you may have heard by now. Governor has declared the public schools are closed for the remainder of the academic year, as reported by NBC Connecticut today on May 5th. It's not too much of a surprise because at this point, 45 states, well, as reported in Education Week on May 3rd, just 2 days ago, 45 states were ordering schools to close. This is how it breaks down on the map. And things are moving fast and changing quickly. Since this came out, 2 states have closed schools for the rest of the academic year: Connecticut and also New Jersey, leaving the remaining states of Pennsylvania, Wyoming, and Montana as the last holdouts, and that could change at any second. There's one thing about these announcements, the directives that come from the state, the directives that come from the federal, the Department of Education. It seems that for everything that we hear, for everything we know, it causes questions to arise, questions where we may not have answers. In fact, you could say that we're in a place where at this point, there are things we know and there are things we don't know, but we will see. Here's one. Schools are closed for the rest of the year. That's what we know. What we don't know is, when will schools reopen? Of course, that's subject to executive order by our governor, and we don't know what that will be. And it's also subject to the virus itself and our war against it and how successful we are. There's a vaccine in the works, but it may not be available for up to 18 months or more. So when schools reopen, they're going to have to take some massive steps to protect students, to protect teachers and their staff. That could include social distancing, temperature screenings, and other methods. And because that vaccine might not be available for 18 more months, planned school modifications should take into account the fact that we're not talking about the upcoming school year only, but the year after that too. Here are some pictures taken from other parts of the world where schools are practicing many of the same things that I'm talking about. Here is a student having his temperature taken before going into a classroom. All over there are images of students practicing social distancing in their schools, wearing masks in classrooms. In fact, you see more masks in classrooms in certain parts of Asia than you do at the Stop and Shop here in Bristol. There is a lot of hand sanitizer that's going to need to be used, and stations like this in the cafeteria, who knows what will happen to that. If you look at the guidelines for restaurants that are in states that are opening up, they discourage the use of salad bars, beverage bars, stations like this because of the virus. So there are some big changes that will need to be made. Not to mention sanitizing, constant cleaning, making sure the virus is not there. One thing we know is that the schools are closed for the rest of the year. What we don't know is, will there be summer school? Now, there are two kinds of summer school. There's the regular summer school that general education children might be eligible for, and then there is extended school year, which is something that special education students may be eligible for. I'll talk about that in a second. But as far as summer school goes, will there be summer school? Apparently not if you live in the city of Danbury. According to Patch.com on May 1st, the mayor of Danbury, Mark Boughton, in response to a question on Facebook, said summer school is off. So much for Danbury. In other parts of the state, though, it may be a different story. In fact, even before the craziness struck, at this time of year, very few public schools had their plans set for summer programs. The governor, as part of what was reported today by NBC Connecticut, the governor is going to consult with state and local educators about summer schools, and we can expect some guidance on that subject towards the end of the month. We know the rules for providing ESY have not changed, but will your child have ESY this summer? We know the rules for ESY haven't changed due to a directive that came out on April 24th from the Connecticut State Department of Education. Here you see a quote from it, which states the criteria for PPT determinations regarding ESY has not changed, period. So folks, we're still operating under the same rules. And what are those rules? What are the criteria for deciding whether a special education student is eligible for a summer program, an ESY program? In front of you, you see one of the most often used reasons for putting a child in an ESY program, the threat of regression, substantial regression, and the likelihood that regaining the skills within a reasonable amount of time won't happen. That, I think, is the number one reason why ESY programs are offered, but that is not the only reason. In fact, it's one of several reasons, several criteria that should be considered. And even if regression is not on the table, these other criteria could be a reason to justify an ESY program. One of those is the nature or severity of the student's disability. That's something to consider when making decisions about ESY. Also, the student's progress, or lack of it, in learning how to be self-sufficient and independent from caretakers. That needs to be considered too. And of course, if there are behaviors that are getting in the way, they need to be considered as well. And there's some wiggle room here for PPT teams. They can identify other circumstances that justified the need for ESY. So there's a lot of wiggle room. These are the reasons why a student may be eligible, a special ed student may be eligible for special education, but the same folks who set down these rules also stated the fact, and it's true, according to my experience, it's the exception, not the rule, to give a student an ESY program. But all these things still apply. That has not changed. One thing we know is that evaluations are on hold for now. What we don't know is when will your child be evaluated? We have some guidance here from the US Department of Education. It says basically that your child's evaluation won't happen until school reopens. But still, there are a lot of questions that come from that. If evaluations aren't going to be done until school reopens, when will your child be evaluated? There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of evaluations missed just because the schools have been closed. How will they handle that? Folks, we don't know. We do know that we can PPT if parents and schools agree it's necessary. And that's something that has been directed by the State Department of Education. But what we don't know is, should you ask for a PPT meeting? Fortunately, we have some guidance on this. According to the State Department of Education, your school district cannot have a blanket policy that there will be no PPT meetings until the schools reopen. However, the decision to PPT, it needs to be individual, student-centered, and made with parent input after considering the child's needs and other factors. In other words, you can ask for a PPT meeting right now, and I'm not here to tell you whether you should or should not. Remember, this is not advice. It's a search for answers. However, if you, the parent, ask for a PPT meeting, you can expect your request for a PPT meeting to be held to this standard. What needs to be considered are the purpose of the PPT meeting, whether there can be meaningful participation by team members. And what this means is not whether the team members will be available for the meeting, not just that, but whether the tools they need, the reports, the evaluations, the data they need in order to do business, will it be available? Another consideration is privacy and confidentiality, which are absolutes for the school people, absolutes. Let's go a little farther down the rabbit hole, shall we? Let's say you're a parent and you want to have your child's annual review PPT meeting. It should have happened by now. The deadline was missed because the school was closed. Well, if school and home agree, and if you have the meeting, the new IEP will apply to only when school reopens. So if one reason why you want an annual review PPT meeting is to revise the IEP so things will be different before school reopens, it's not going to happen. Let's say you're a parent who wants a triennial review PPT meeting. What happens in that case? Well, if all the evaluations for the triennial review were completed before the schools closed down, and the parents and the school agree that it's necessary, you can have your triennial review, or the parents can and the district can agree to postpone it. In fact, the parents and the district can even agree that a triennial review is not necessary at this time. What if you're the parent of a child who's going through the referral process, who's waiting for a PPT meeting to review an initial evaluation? Well, if, and that's if the initial evaluation was completed before the school closed and the complete evaluation is available and all the accompanying materials, then the state is very clear. The school district should convene a PPT meeting, review the evaluation, if necessary, develop an IEP, and find the student eligible if that's what is necessary, if that's what's appropriate. One thing we know is that special education students may be eligible for compensatory services when schools finally do reopen. What we don't know is how will your child get compensatory services? OSERS, which is part of the US Department of Education, issued some guidance on this. It said that when schools reopen, PPT teams must make an individualized determination. That means one student at a time, depending on their individual levels of performance, and see if they have regressed, and if they have, the team needs to determine what kind of compensatory services may be needed. This is a promise to us, parents, made by the US Department of Education. We do expect it to be lived up to. We know that the federal laws that protect our children's rights to education are not waived. And folks, up until last week, this was questionable. Because of the CARES Act and federal legislation, part of the stimulus bill, Congress was going to consider waivers to IDEA, Section 504, and other legislation that gives safeguards to our children. There will be waivers. Waivers have been proposed, but they do not affect our basic rights or our children's rights. So that has been preserved. However, what we don't know is, how will schools meet their obligations to our children? It's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough. Schools have been closed. Many evaluations have been missed. Many PPT meetings have been missed. When schools finally reopen, schools will have to deal with the same restrictions that any other institutions have to deal with because of the virus. Plus, they have to go to great lengths to protect their students, their teachers, and their staff. They have to offer compensatory services to children who have regressed, and they have to do it in a way that's appropriate. So, how will schools meet their obligations to our children? As I said earlier, there are some things we know, and there are some things we don't know, but we'll see. On the next answers, my special guest will be Lori Singer, Director of Special Services in Farmington. Coming up is my interview with Walt Glomb, the Executive Director of the Connecticut Council on Developmental Disabilities. But next, we have a report on the school update from Audra Talbot. Earlier, Audra met with a parent, Paul, who lives in central Connecticut with his family. Let's listen in on their conversation.
Paul, thank you for joining me tonight on Answers.
Thank you. I have the daughter, Jenna, is 15 years old, and she diagnosed the autism from the 2 years old, and she cannot talking, she cannot do anything, but she always singing the song. So before, when we start, we cannot communicate with her, but we need to learn a lot of things, like this sign language, like the graphic, like the computer. We need talking with her because she only cry, and she have a lot of emotion we don't know about like that. So we need to learn a lot. We need to learn start the beginning. So until we know about her, she will be comfortable, and she but sometimes not really good. And because we know about her, she don't want to learning the talk. She just only like to cry. Oh, you know I'm crying, and you know what I want. So we go into the learning the special education. They say no, you need to learning the different thing and let her know, and not only just the cry. And you need to let her to do the understand the sign language. After that, and we go into the school. We have a lot of things there, so they happen all the time. So that's it's about my Jenna there.
So Jana's school, what is Jana's school doing to keep learning going for you?
When the school start going to the online, and she still have the class there, but we cannot go into because she have the camera from the Zoom, from the some I don't know, I forgot the Zoom the name, and they have camera. You can see the giraffe, you can see the elephant there, but first time she not very interesting. And we probably only in the 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and she get off that, and she just cry. I don't want to do it. I want to stay like that. So a lot of things we still cannot do it from the computer because she already comfortable with the teacher, and she can show the teacher, and she can show the IA there, and now I want only the computer. I don't want to do that. She will think about that. So that's why usually it's my wife that help her to do that. I saw her to do everything until I think we off the 2 weeks, and probably the teacher didn't see us say, oh, why the Jenna didn't go online, and there's maybe something wrong there, and she contact us from the email, from the phone, and finally she knows, oh, we had the problem with that. So she reschedule, and see the what time is good for the Jenna, because the Jenna sometimes will be wake up the night time, maybe around 2 or 3, but when we give her the sleeping the medicine, and she will go back sleep until the probably 9 or 10. So school will be started 11. So 11 to 1. First day, so far so good. Until right now, it's now every the school day will be probably 2 hours with the teacher. No, it's 1 hour with teacher, 1 hour with IA. So she's comfortable, and she can sit in there without the help, and she can listen in the teacher what she teach like that, and what she want Jenna to do it. And sometimes she will go away because there's always like that. She will, oh, I want to go to the bathroom, and she will leave there, and we need to call her back. Say, Jenna, come out, you didn't finish, and then she will be continuing. So now it's hanging out there. I don't want to say doing very well, but at least and teacher already pay attention to us. Now I mean because usually you not go on, it's your the problem, not our the problem, and she don't need to help. But I think that we have a good school teacher to take care of us. So that's a school day.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for explaining that, Paul. So I have a quick question for you. So you said IA. I just want to make sure that everyone listening, that's instructional assistant. Is that the same in your school? Is that
yes.
what they're called?
Yes.
Like a paraprofessional? Yeah. So are you finding that, helping Jana with her work is probably very overwhelming? You said your wife is doing it during the day and you're working during the day. So I'm sure you're helping too during the day.
Right.
The instructional assistant, are they doing a lot of help with her work? Is that like a different Zoom meeting? Like, how does that work?
She just like the regular, talking, just like say I talking to you like on the Zoom. I say, hey Jenna, you want to finish that? So what's the today? And today is the 26th or today is Monday or today is Tuesday, and how old are you? This kind of question, they would keep the repeat. And then let her to remember, because sometimes this kind of kid, you need to keep the repeat, and then they understand what you're talking about. And I know that this kind of question just let her remember a lot of the different things, and she probably cannot do that, but they always try to help like that, and at least she can stand and sitting here and watch the camera, see what you're doing. If you smile, and she will be feel, oh, I'm good now. Sometimes she will say,
Yeah.
I'm doing good. Yeah.
Well, thank you for explaining that. So I have a quick question for you. How often do you speak to Gianna's teachers and the staff from the school? Is it an everyday thing? Is it a couple times a day? Is it once a week?
If like this time, I would be remembered like my wife after that, and she would be talk to the teacher and see what's going on today, and see the tomorrow when is good time, or sometimes and they would be email each other, see what's going on. And because teachers sometimes they will talk to us, say if you got any problem or anything you want to change, you can email me, and then we can discuss. So that's why we doing like that.
Now that we all had to transition home with our children,
right
now, hopefully, at the end of the COVID stay-at-home order, when we have to go back to school, how would you like to prepare Gianna, or do you have any advice for other parents to transition back into school?
I know my Gianna, when she going to go back to school, will be very difficult.
I think all of us are going to have to go through a transitional phase, going back into society, yeah. Let alone just go back to school as well for our kids. So I have a different question for you, Paul. Okay. So Gianna has an older brother, Andrew.
Yes.
And so what is Andrew doing for distance learning? Now, is Andrew a special education child?
No, Andrew is the normal kid, and she is she in the high school. I think this year will be second year, and she like stay home to learning from the computer, because she say, I don't need to dress up. I just easy way to learning, yeah. And sometimes I can eat it, and I have a lot of snack around me, and I can pick out the snack, I can pick out the Coke, and I can drink in snack, and I eat it to finish, because now I school, and I think only 3 hours, 4 hours, and he without the like bus time, and he don't need to take the bus. Going home, going to school, so he had a lot of time after finish, and oh, I'm done. I can go into sleep. I can go into the game time. So that is for him. But sometimes, the parent, when we see that, and we will say, no, not really good for you, because next year is tough year. If you like that, you will be far away. You cannot go into a good college like that.
I don't have any more questions, but do you have anything that is kind of like anything else you'd like to add? Or, what are the positive things that, I know it's hard sometimes to find the positive things in everything that's happening, because we have so much that we're thinking about as the adults in the situation. But what's something positive that's happened for you and your family from all of this?
It's right now, I can say that you need to pay attention for the child, or sometimes if you cannot get anything, you need to talk to the teacher right away or email them. But some people, I know some parents, and they will do it, didn't watch the kid, and didn't know what he want, what she want, until big problem come out. They will be too late. Mm-hmm. And you need to pay attention each thing. And I remember when we started elementary school, and when we would talk to the teacher, say, I want that. I want the speech therapy. I need more the hours there. If you didn't do that, they just give you that regular hours, maybe 1.5, or they didn't think about it's good for you. When we say I want that, and they do it, and some parents say, oh, I didn't know that. And the teacher will say, oh, not too many parents would be required like that. You need to pay attention because she already part of your life. You need to take care of her. You cannot abandon her like that.
And thank you for letting us tell your story and Jana's story about your family. I really do appreciate it. And I appreciate your time. So thank you.
Thank you, Audra, and many thanks to you, Paul. Up next is my interview with Walt Glomb of the Connecticut Council on Developmental Disabilities. Welcome to Answers, Walt. Walt is the Executive Director of the Connecticut Council on Developmental Disabilities, otherwise known as the DD Council. And the DD Council was created by federal law back in 2001, I believe. DD Council members are appointed by the governor. And I got that date wrong. They are appointed.
1971.
1971. I knew it was a year that had a number associated with it, so I wasn't too far off. And Walt is the executive director of the DD Council, which works for system change and supporting people with disabilities. So Walt, welcome to Answers.
Glad to be here.
So many special education students, whether they're 6 years old or 16 years old now, so many of them, when they make the transition from high school to adulthood, a lot of them come to depend on state agencies for support in important parts of their lives. I mean, support in things like employment, housing, help with self-care, that kind of thing. What are these agencies? Can you tell us what they are, please?
Sure, Kevin. There are a variety of state agencies, state and local agencies that provide services to individuals, young adults who have disabilities. I'll give you a few of them. For a start, there's the Department of Developmental Services. We often refer to these agencies by their initials, so we talk about DDS, the Department of Developmental Services, which offers employment programs, day programs, and in-home supports for individuals who have intellectual disabilities. Then there is the State Bureau of Rehabilitation Services, often referred to as BRS, which provides employment services for people with any disability. And by the way, you can individuals can receive services from each of these together. So you can resist from both DDS and BRS and others if you're eligible. Then there's the Department of Social Services, DSS, which offers Medicaid medical insurance, assistance with activities of daily living. They also manage the autism waiver, autism services, and the brain injury waiver. There is the State Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services for people with psychiatric disabilities or substance dependence. There is the State Department of Transportation, which offers paratransit services, discounted taxi service, and discounted bus fares. The State Department of Labor offers assistance with employment. The State Department of Housing offers rental assistance. Then, of course, there's the Federal Social Security Administration, which provides cash assistance, cash benefit to people with disabilities. And families should not overlook their towns. Most towns actually have a social worker or even a Department of Social Services. And there are local social service programs and always a town housing authority. So there's quite a variety of agencies out there to help people.
That's good to know. Now, the governor's orders have affected all institutions right across the board. They're safety measures. And how have these safety measures that were ordered by the governor in response to the pandemic, how have they affected these Connecticut state agencies and their ability to support people with disabilities?
Well, as I think most people know, for the time being, most state offices are closed, and state workers are working remotely. Most facility-based and congregate service programs are closed, except for residential facilities, which of course continue to house, support the people who live there, but are closed to visitors. Many services are now being delivered remotely by telephone or internet applications such as Zoom. And how that's being done really depends upon the agency. So people should check the web page for the agency in question and look at whatever instructions they have. And if you've been to the state website recently, you'll see there are bright banners on every web page about what that agency or what the state's doing during the pandemic. So if you go to the agency website, you'll find instructions on how to access services while the offices are closed. And just realize that since most people are working from home, many may not be answering their state office telephones. So email is usually the best way to reach people unless the agency gives you other instructions.
Now, that's good to know. What about the private service providers? The service providers the state employs to support people with disabilities, how have they been affected by the pandemic?
Well, it's a similar story. All congregate day programs are closed, and private providers are implementing creative alternatives, such as Zoom meetings. In some cases, they maybe have creating small group meetings, less than 5 people, with personal protective equipment and proper social distancing. But they are permitted to gather small groups. All private residential facilities, while of course they continue to operate, they're closed to visitors. So people are finding ways to connect, again, creatively, either through FaceTime or other personal video applications, or through Windows. And when I say Windows, I mean glass windows, not the operating system. Again, the programs are all continuing to operate, but these services are being delivered in a different way.
Well, these days, parents of students with disabilities are breathing a sigh of relief that there were no waivers proposed to the federal laws that affect our children's rights to an education. There were no waivers that affected their rights, which makes me wonder, looking past where we are now with the restrictions on group settings and that kind of thing, and looking at the big picture. When it comes to receiving services from these state agencies, has anything fundamental changed? Is someone who was eligible for services, say from DDS, will that person be eligible now or 6 months from now?
Yes, they will. Fundamentally, nothing has changed except the manner in which services are delivered. So the eligibility criteria are the same. Everyone's civil rights are the same. All programs and services remain intact. Intake continues, albeit remotely. So people should be following the same process that they would otherwise follow in terms of approaching an agency, going through the eligibility process. Again, you just need to go to the website, see what the process is now, because you're not going to an office, you're not going to meet with anyone in person. You're going to need to do it all remotely according to whatever protocols they have set up. I know some DDS private providers, for example, now offer virtual tours of their facilities and programs. So you can't go and visit them, but you can do so, virtually. So, and hence, this year's graduates, for example, are going through the intake process with DDS. They're going to get their budgets. They'll be deemed eligible the same way they always did, and they'll be selecting programs for their individual plans. So all that stuff is still happening. If anyone has problems or concerns, they should be addressing them the same way they normally would. Call the helpline or call your caseworker. If you're already with an agency, they should go to the agency supervisor that they normally work with. And if they're unhappy with the result, it's the same process that we would always recommend. Escalate, escalate, escalate. Call the executive director, call the regional director. It's the same protocol, only now you're not going to be going to see anybody face to face. You're going to be doing it over the phone or via email.
That seems to be affecting a lot of folks these days. Yeah. And for our participants who are watching, if you do not see a Q&A button on your screen, please feel free to use the chat button to communicate with us. Whatever you put in chat will go directly to Walt or to me. Walt, a minute ago you mentioned a whole bunch of state agencies. I know that most parents of special education students are used to dealing with just one agency, really, their local school district. What's it like for parents of special education students to go from dealing with one entity to multiple entities?
You're not in Kansas anymore. It's a different world. As you know, I'm a dad. My son, who has Down syndrome, is now in his 30s, so I went through this transition 10 years ago. And it is a different world. Firstly, there are very few entitlements that have the strength of the IDEA, right? I mean, when your child is in school, they are guaranteed a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. There's no question. And you have tremendous power to enforce that through due process and ultimately through the courts. Adult services, most of them are of a different nature. They're not entitlements. They're there. There are services available, but there may be waiting lists. It's a different process. And as we said at the beginning, there's a great variety of agencies doing this. There's DDS, there's VRS, there's DSS, there's mental health, transportation, labor, housing, local organizations. And there's really no single point of entry for all these things. So it's a different experience than you had as a parent dealing with your PPT, right? When your child is in school, for many people, the main entity you dealt with was the local school district. Now you really need to do some research. You need to spend some time researching and contacting each of these agencies that might have some services or benefits available to your adult child, and start building those relationships, because they have separate eligibility criteria, they have different processes, and you really need to work with a number of them independently. It's a very different experience, and you just need to be prepared to spend some time doing the research, making the contacts to see that your adult child gets everything that's available to them.
Doing that research will help you avoid a situation where you haven't done the research and you find out as you go along. Sometimes you find out things the hard way, and that's less than ideal. So when it comes to planning for the future, doing research, what else should parents do to plan for the future?
Well, I recommend that people use a person-centered planning tool. For example, there's the life course tool that's out there. Many of our school districts have now been trained in how to use this tool. It is the tool used by DDS in building a person's individual plan. And the idea there is that before you start looking at services, before you start looking at state agencies, create a vision for this individual. with the individual. What is the vision for employment, for housing, for post-secondary education, social life, services? What are their needs? Where do they want to go? What do they want to be? I mean, like you might for any child. And then what services and supports do you need in order to make that happen? That'll put you in a much better place to understand the services and supports that are available from all these different agencies.
Well, when it comes to understanding the services and supports that are available after graduating from high school, before graduation, are guidance counselors important? Do they play an important role?
I think so. I really hope that all our children who are receiving special education services are taking advantage of the high school guidance counselors and whatever related career planning programs a school might have. I know my son did, and that was a great benefit to him. I'm afraid that in many cases, the way some special education programs are structured, a student in special ed may not be exposed to the guidance counselors. But our kids have the same need to plan their future, to dream, to crystallize, their plan for themselves as anyone else. And of course, that's what the guidance counselors are there for. So I strongly recommend that people utilize guidance counselors and that they put that, in the IEP, that when it's appropriate, when that student's approaching age 18, and then during those transition years, that they take advantage of the high school guidance counselors and any related high school career planning programs that might be available.
Let's talk about employment for a second. It's estimated that right now about 20% of the workforce is unemployed due to layoffs and closures. Even with state agency assistance, is this a good time for a young person with a disability to be applying for work?
Oh, absolutely. I think I just noticed in the Hartford Courant over the past week, they published a list of a number, I think more than 15 large companies that are looking for, I counted, on the order of 10,000 entry-level workers in Connecticut right now. These are current job openings in Connecticut. And it's always best to be in the job market looking and gaining experience with building your resume, interview skills, learning how to fill out job applications, most of which is done online these days anyway. So I'm not sure that the COVID-19 social distancing is having a big impact on that, because as if you haven't been out there, you can't just walk into most places these days and apply for a job in person. They tell you to go home and do it on your computer, or they send you to a kiosk. So that's largely an online process already. So yeah, I think it's certainly an appropriate and a very good idea for students to start that process, get online, start applying for jobs online. And then when the economy comes back after this, if they didn't land one of those jobs that's open right now, they'll have the experience and they'll have the connections. Because look, just like everyone else, our adult children are going to need money to pay for housing and other necessities, and the job is one way to get that, to do that. Always better to be employed with earned income than not.
Sure, but people with disabilities who depend on Medicaid or SSI for support, won't they start losing money or have their services terminated if they get a job and start earning money?
No, that's one of the great misunderstandings. People do not necessarily lose their Medicaid or Social Security benefits when they start earning money. In fact, Medicaid and Social Security are both now structured to encourage competitive employment with meaningful wages. Now, just to give you a sense, a person can certainly earn at least 100,000. Sorry, 100,000. 1,000. Let me try that again. a person can earn up to $1,000 a month without compromising their Medicaid or their Social Security benefits. They can actually earn much more in certain circumstances. What I recommend is that when people enroll in Medicaid and Social Security, that they enroll in what's called the MedConnect, which is Medicaid for Employees with Disabilities. It's a Medicaid eligibility group designed specifically for people who they still need some help. They're still going to need some benefits, that health insurance and perhaps some waiver services, but they're able to work. When they enroll that way, that gives them, allows them to earn more income and have more assets in their name, and then continue to receive benefits. And then it turns out after they've been working for a while, they may earn their Social Security disability benefit, which is another thing that'll help them going forward. So absolutely, people should be looking at employment and don't be too concerned about losing those benefits. Now, having said that, there are rules, there are thresholds, you have to do this right. So I encourage people to talk to a benefits counselor at the Bureau of Rehab Services who are experts in this, and they can guide you to how to fill out the right paperwork to ensure that earned income doesn't compromise your Medicaid or Social Security.
Let's look at the big picture for a second. What advice would you give to young people with disabilities and their families who are getting close to making the transition from high school to adult life, and they worry about the pandemic's effect on their ability to live a good life? What do you say, Walt?
Well, the pandemic is not going to be here forever, all right? And the basic principles of planning a good life haven't changed, right? You're talking about decisions that are going to leverage the next 50 years of a person's life, right? And this pandemic, it's going to be gone soon enough. Now, it may leave some permanent imprints on our society. We may be wearing masks for a while, and that may be, months or perhaps, more than a year. But the time will come where this will pass, and life will go on. Schools will reopen, government offices will return to normal, the pandemic will be history, and our children will still have a future with all the same hopes and dreams and opportunities that they had before the pandemic started. So, I would encourage people to look beyond what years from now, we will realize was a short-term inconvenience.
I certainly hope so. The last question I have for you before we go to questions from participants is actually not about the pandemic. It's about guardianship. This is a topic that many parents are interested in hearing more about. Walt, could you explain to us what is guardianship, and are there alternatives to guardianship?
Well, thank you, Kevin. As you know, this is one of my favorite topics. Guardianship is an extreme step of essentially taking over decision-making for an individual that could limit opportunities for them later in life. And what many parents are aware of, if your child is approaching transition age, is that when a child turns 18, they become the master of their life. Excuse me. So at age 18, a student's school records, their medical records, their financial records all become protected by a variety of privacy laws, FERPA and HIPAA and so forth. So if parents don't take some action by the time or at the time that the child turns 18, they may not have access to all that information. Now, guardianship is the most restrictive option for doing that. And there are less restrictive ways to do it. And just as in school and adult life, we like to seek the least restrictive options for supporting our children. So if all you're looking for is the authority to participate in educational, medical and financial decisions with your adult child, your child can accomplish that with you by executing a power of attorney, by appointing you as a healthcare representative, by signing releases of records and information to you as needed, or with voluntary conservatorships. These are all much less restrictive of their personal liberty and enable you to participate in supported decision-making with your child.
I like the way you use liberty, the word liberty there. Here in New England, the birthplace of the American Revolution, we're kind of sensitive about things like liberty. So this is good to know. Let's take a look at questions from participants. And here's one. My daughter has a PCA, that's personal care assistant. The PCA is paid for by DDS, who is not seeing her due to the COVID-19 virus. I got a letter from the fiscal intermediary, Allied, saying that the PCA is applying for unemployment. Do I have any personal liability for this? Are these payments going to eat into my daughter's budget? Don't misunderstand. I don't blame her for applying. I hope she is eligible.
That is a good question, and I honestly am not quite sure of the answer. Your fiscal intermediary should be able to answer that question. I don't believe that you are liable. Unemployment, of course, is paid out of an unemployment insurance fund, which you should have been paying into, or the fiscal intermediary should have been paying into. So I think that's a question for you to take up with the fiscal intermediary.
Here's another question. Can you talk about why our adult children do not need a guardian?
Well, as I said earlier, there are other supported decision-making tools out there that accomplish much of what many people seek to accomplish with a guardianship. Power of attorney, allows you to act for your adult child with their permission. Information releases signed with schools or with doctors or whatever allow you access to medical records. Being appointed as a healthcare representative allows you to make certain medical decisions. And then there are voluntary conservatorships, which are a bit broader, but still do not strip your child of their liberty, but allow them to authorize you to work in their stead. So the answer to the question is that you don't need a guardianship because there are other ways to do it that are less restrictive.
Fair enough. Another question. Hi, my son is 19 with Down syndrome. Should we apply for Title 19 for him? What is the benefit?
Well, my answer is yes, I think you should. And the benefit is that most of the state services that are available are funded through Medicaid. So in order to get supports from DDS or from many other state agencies, you must be Medicaid eligible. So Title 19 is a necessity if you want to take advantage of DDS waiver programs or some ADS programs, and certainly if they want the health insurance. One of the benefits of Title 19 is that your child would then receive Medicaid health coverage as a backup. Now, even if you as a parent have a plan that will cover your child until age 26, you may want to have that Medicaid there as a backup for your child, certainly when they get older.
This is good to know. Thank you, Walt. We have time for one last question from participants, and this is a very thoughtful one. The 2020 reality is providing a substantial shock factor for guardians, kin, caregivers, and more so in underserved communities. The grim reality of leaving our loved ones behind without adequate tools and personal liberties has now come to a head as our leaders fail to meet us where we've left where we've left outside emergency rooms or worse. In response to the prevailing crisis and amplified inequities of our IDDD families during the COVID-19 crisis, how will we, the families, be empowered to minimize risk for our loved ones while maximizing personal liberty? Walt?
Whoa, good question. And it's really a call to action. This crisis has revealed some serious gaps in service. It's revealed some significant institutional bias in the system. So, let me try and dissect that. First of all, how are families empowered going forward? Well, you're empowered by your advocacy. Okay, based on our experiences over the last couple months, we need to speak up to our legislators, to our public officials about things that failed, things that didn't get done. Clearly, the state was not prepared with enough, for example, personal protective equipment. Okay, one of the disappointments I have is that our home and community-based service system was not prioritized in the distribution of that equipment. In my view, our PCAs and our direct service workers should have been given the same status as nurses or any other frontline healthcare worker, and they weren't. And that's a problem. Now, I understand acute care hospitals had to be the number one priority, but after that, I think many people in the state don't realize that most of our family members now are not living in institutions. They are living at home with an array of community supports. And we need a much better way of supporting them when emergencies like this come up. Ways to get them personal protective equipment, ways to get them more services. We need more advocacy at the Department of Public Health, at private hospitals, so that they understand the needs of our children. As many of you know, we're fighting a fight to see that hospitals will allow families or caregivers to accompany individuals with intellectual disabilities or behavior needs into hospitals. And two other states nearby, New York and New Jersey, have both had executive orders requiring hospitals to do that. We don't have that in Connecticut right now. And that's a failing, and I think it's a lack of an understanding on the part of agencies beyond those that provide direct services to our children, that our folks are out there in the community, and they need to be supported in hospitals like everybody else, and they might need their own special supports. Their staff, if they're going to come into the home and support us in the community, need the appropriate protective equipment and protocols. When all the day programs were closed and more than five individuals who had been served by DDS in day programs were sent home, there was no plan, there was no programming. Now, to their credit, many agencies stepped up quickly and found ways to utilize technology. People got creative in putting things on Zoom and other platforms. But we need to go back and take a look at this and ask, why wasn't more of this done in advance? What's going on where people around the state haven't seen or haven't noticed that our kids are living in the community like everybody else, and they need supports there, not in institutions, but out at their homes. This is a job, this is a systemic change issue. This is actually, when you get down to it, this is the job of the council. In other words, my job. We're taking notes. We're going to be making recommendations to the governor and to the federal government on what didn't happen the way maybe we wished it had, and what changes need to be made to the way services are structured and the way emergency planning is done. And I encourage everybody to speak up. I'm accepting comments from people, so if you have any concerns or any thoughts on how things should have been done better, feel free to send me your ideas, and we'll include that in our reporting.
Okay, thank you, Walt. And I like that. I like that idea, a call to action, a call for more advocacy to support our children and the adults to whom they will become. I like that. One last question, it just came in. Can you apply for Medicaid later than 19 years old, Walt?
Oh, you can apply, I believe you can apply for Medicaid at any time, okay? Now, so yeah, that's that. Now understand that if some other services, it's better to do sooner than later. I mean, for example, the Department of Developmental Services and some other state agencies, they require that certain documentation be created before the age of 19, okay, or perhaps before the age of 18. So things like IQ testing and so forth, where that's required. It's not required for all services, but just be aware that some things are easier to do at age 18 than they are later. There are some state services, as I said, that are subject to waiting lists. Some of those programs are easier to get into as you're graduating school. You can certainly apply for Title 19. You can be deemed eligible. You can apply for these services all at a later time in life, but you may be placed on a waiting list. You may not be guaranteed services. This is what I meant when I started saying that these adult services are not entitlements. Connecticut has had a policy of providing, at least DDS, a service plan to every new graduate. That does not apply to every person who walks in the door later on. So yes, you can apply for Medicaid later, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get all the services that you might have obtained if you did it at age 18.
This is good to know. Walt, you're a wealth of information. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. I do appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. Hope to see you on the next edition of Answers on May 12th. Be well.